welcome to the first episode of YA First Chapter Fridays. I'm Katie, a teen librarian with the St. Mary's County Library System. Each episode I will be reading you the first chapter of a young adult book we have in the library. Today I will be reading the first chapter from Mirage by Somaiya Daud. Take a moment to relax, get yourself comfortable, and let's get started. Chapter 1. On a small moon orbiting a large planet, in a small farmhouse in a small village, there was a box, and in this box was a feather. The box was old, its wood worn of any trace of design or paint. It smelled of saffron and cinnamon, sharp and sweet. Along with the feather there sat an old signet ring, a red bloom preserved in resin, and a strip of green velvet cloth frayed around the edges. I crept into my parents' room often when I was small, always to peek into the box, and its mystique only increased in my eyes when my mother began to hide it from me. The feather fascinated me. A 5-year-old had no use for a ring or a flower or fabric, but the feather of a magic extinct bird, like all things from the old order, it called to me. The feather was black, made up of 100 dark jewel shades. When I held it up to the light, it rippled, with blues and greens and reds, like magic reacting to some unseen hand roiling to the surface. It had belonged to a tesleet bird, my mother said. Birds once thought to be messengers of Daya. When Daya wanted to give you a sign, he slipped the feather into your hand. When he wanted to command you to a calling, to take action, he sent the bird itself. It was a holy and high calling, and not to be taken lightly. War, pilgrimage, the fate of nations, this is what the tesleet called a person for. My grandfather had received a tesleet, though my mother never talked about why or even who he was. A foolhardy man, who died grieving all he did not accomplish, she'd said to me once. I stared into the old box, my eyes unfocused, my gaze turned inward. The sun would set soon, and I didn't have time to waste by staring at an old feather. But it called to me as it had when I was a little girl, and my thumb swept over its curve, back and forth without thinking. There was no tesleet left on Cadiz, or our mother planet, Andala. Like many things from my mother's childhood, they had left, or been spent, or were extinguished. All we had were relics, traces of what once was and would likely never be again. I jumped when my mother cleared her throat in the doorway. "Amani," was all she said, one eyebrow raised. It was too late to hide the box, and I could not keep down the surge of guilt for having snooped in my parents' room just to bring it out again. But my mother said nothing, only smiled and came forward, hand outstretched. Did your father give you the feather?" I asked at last, and handed the box over. Her eyes widened a little. For a moment I thought she wouldn't answer. "No," she said softly, closing the box's lid. "I found it a little while after the bird had gone, in a moment of weakness in some shrubbery." I rarely saw my mother look as she did now, soft and wistful, as if remembering a kinder time. She'd survived 2 wars, the Civil War, and then the Vathic invasion and following occupation. She was hard, with a spine of steel, unbendable, unbindable, and unbreakable. "What was your moment of weakness?" I asked. I wouldn't get a response, I never did. But my mother surprised me and smiled. "I was running from love," she said. "Your father, to be specific. I saw in my own heart my father's capacity to lose himself in another person, and it frightened me." My mouth dropped to her amusement. I knew my parents loved each other. It was obvious to anyone who watched them, despite their differences. But I'd never heard my mother say as much, and to hear her admit it of her own free will. What are you doing here at any rate? You're meant to be getting ready for tonight. I didn't know how to explain it, so I just shook my head and shrugged. I don't know, I love it. I suppose I wanted to see it again. She came forward and tilted my chin up. I was full grown, and my mother still towered over me by a full head. The backs of her fingers brushed over my cheek, tracing the lines where I would receive my dan. Sharp, geometric tattoos that would mark my first step into adulthood. I hoped they looked like hers did. Stark and powerful, letting the whole world know who she was and where she was from in a single glance. I know this week has been difficult, she said at last. More difficult than most, but it will pass as they do. I bit my tongue rather than say what I thought. I shouldn't have to wait for them to pass. They should never be in the first place. We had suffered not only the burning of our fields this week, but the increased presence of the Vath. But my mother surprised me into silence a second time, and set the box back into my hand. I think this should pass to you, she said, her voice soft again. Hope is a younger girl's game, and you find more comfort in it than I do. I opened and closed my mouth, wordless with shock. Really? I said at last. She smiled again. Really, she repeated and kissed my forehead. Perhaps Dia will send you a second feather, and you shall have your own sign in these trying times. My mother left me alone in her room, the box still clasped to my chest. After a moment I moved to hide the box away in my room, lest she come up the stairs and change her mind. The sun was setting truly now, and I hurried to put it away and find my things. Katia would be waiting, and I hated to hear her skewer me for my tardiness. Outside, the village was quiet. Normally around now I could hear the quiet singing of field workers as they made their way back to the village, and the ringing of the end-of-day bell. The march of boots, the cries of sellers hawking their wares in the village square, dogs and goats crying out. All those sounds were absent. There were no fields left. Not after the fire the Imperial Garda set last week. Rebels, or more likely starving thieves, had taken shelter in one of the gatehouses. Rather than looking through each one, the Garda had set fire to the fields. We'd heard the rebels screaming from far away as the village square. Now with the fields gone, the village was counting down the weeks till winter, and the famine that was sure to follow. What would I want my own feather, my own sign for? In the wake of this, of life, I had no need for a sign. I wanted something else, something more tangible and immediate. I wanted the world. The Vath were not settlers in our nebula. They'd lived on their planet, Vaxor, mostly peacefully and in accordance with the galactic laws, but they'd poisoned their own atmosphere and were forced to relocate to an orbiting moon. A stopgap measure, with an exploding population and a lack of resources. Some said it was inevitable, that they chose to expand to other systems. There were moments when I glimpsed the world as it was before the occupation of the Vath, when my mother or father spoke without thinking, or a village aunt said, "When I was young," or a man sang an old song I'd never heard before. The bones of our old ways of life were there, barely traceable, and I wanted them back. I wanted all of us to remember what we'd been, how strong we were, and endurance was strength, to be sure, but even a rock wore away to nothing if asked to endure enough rain. I could want until I was dead and nothing would come to pass. Wanting never solved anything. I tucked the box away with a sigh, found my cloak and shoes, and made my way downstairs. I really hope you enjoyed the first chapter of Mirage by Somaiya Daud. If you're looking for more book recommendations, head over to the library website and you'll find a recommended reading page under the Read, Listen, and Watch tab. Also make sure to check out the library's book blog called On the Shelf. Staff members leave book reviews for titles for all ages, so make sure to check that out and find your next great read. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next week. Take care.